Hey, I'm Allison here, and welcome to Little Left of Center, the podcast that interviews culture changers that are reshaping our world and breaking new ground. If you're going to attract and keep the best talent, what does your company actually stand for? You may have noticed a shift in the importance of work culture. Pay, benefits, 401k, snacks in the break room, they've all become table stakes. And today's guest on Little Left of Center is Chad Hickey, founder and CEO of Lucky Forks. Lucky Forks is an organization that helps companies implement a social responsibility strategy. We discuss the impact to companies' bottom lines, as well as what multiplying social good can do for a global impact. Also, Chad was super fun and smart. Please enjoy. So I am here today with Chad Hickey. He is the founder and the CEO. Is that right? Are you the CEO?
Yes, that's correct.
Of Lucky Forks. Lucky Forks is a social responsibility service. And I am so thankful not only to have you on the podcast, but it's so funny because I think that the social responsibility that corporations are now starting to think about is kind of like when you are thinking about buying a Jeep, or you buy a Jeep and then all of a sudden you see Jeeps everywhere. And it's funny because as I, was preparing for this interview, I met this woman in Atlanta. So Chad is in New York City, but I met this woman in Atlanta who has a similar organization called Social Measures. And I thought, you know what? It is the thing. It is the thing. So I want to hear.
Yes, it's starting to catch on.
Yeah, but I want to hear more from you. Tell me more about you and how this came about.
Yeah. So, I've been in the advertising space for the past 17 years, primarily in sales leadership. Started my career out in print at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So I know you're in Atlanta, so shout out there to the AJC.
Yes.
Yeah. So started my career there. Moved to New York with a startup, worked in various different, technology companies. But, I think that, as you go through your 20s and your 30s, talking about how you land kind of on what I'm doing today, as you go through that, it's a scenario where you, learn a lot of things of like what you want out of life and what you don't want out of life. And, what I ended up doing was, just realizing at one point, when was I the most happiest in my career? And I kept going back to different experiences that I had where I was doing something like socially impactful. And I was lucky enough to work for a company who had, a social responsibility strategy. And I saw what that did for the organization. I saw what it did for our employees. I saw what it did for the culture, those sort of things. And so when I was saying, what do I want? As I go into my 40s, because I'm not a spring chicken anymore, as I go into my 40s, what do I really want? It wasn't necessarily about chasing the paycheck anymore. It was more about like doing something that made me happy. So that was where I landed when it came to social responsibility. It was really, that was the catalyst. And then it started to spiral into other things. To your point, like doing research on, products that are socially responsible, but then also just the workforce change that's happening with Gen Z, because there is, I think, such a fundamental shift happening that people aren't paying attention to, where people want more. You have a generation coming into, the workforce that will be 24% of the workforce next year, and that's Gen Z, that's always grown up with school shootings and social media, and they just think completely different. I actually did a panel at Advertising Week this week with Gen Z, and I asked them to use words that describe themselves. And one of the words that they used was entitled. And
really,
at first, yeah. And so you probably have a reaction like, ooh, kind of a negative word to describe yourself. But after thinking about that conversation, what they were really saying is, I'm worthy. You know what I mean? And they were saying, I am worthy to have a clean environment. I am worthy to have a workplace that gives me, work-life balance. I am worthy to work at a company that shares my values and respects me as an individual. And I thought it was just so powerful that was, one, the way they defined it, and two, just how they think so differently. But I mean, it will be the largest transfer of wealth the next 10 years. In 10 years, Gen Z will represent 75% of the workforce. And I just don't think that employers are paying attention to how fundamentally different they are. So that's a long answer to how I landed on the company Lucky Forks, but it kind of encompasses all of that of getting these companies ready.
And I thought what was interesting is I listened to your I think it was the first episode of your podcast. What's the name of your podcast again?
It is the new voice of the employee.
The new voice of the employee. And I was kind of stopped dead in my tracks because I never thought of it this way. But you and a guest were talking about kind of what the playing field is like when you're looking for a job. So whether it is Gen Z, Gen Y, millennial, whether it's whoever, is that what I remember about looking for a job is you want to make sure that there are good benefits. There's 401k, there's some security there. A ping pong table's nice. Maybe that they have snacks in a kitchen. But I think that the point was those are table stakes now, that when people are looking for a career, they want something that the culture is going to fit them. And even when I've worked for Salesforce. So Salesforce is real, like we have social responsibility embedded in our culture. And, even if I get hit up all the time by recruiters, and I always, think about, well, what if I were to go somewhere else and nothing beats the culture of Salesforce. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, why is social responsibility from a corporation so important to their bottom line?
Yeah, because it says that you care beyond profitability. I mean, if you look at what happened with the Business Roundtable and the 181 CEOs that came out and said, look, it's about the stakeholder, not just the shareholder anymore. I mean, that was a very powerful statement, fundamentally different from any statement that's ever been done in business. And I think that, from that perspective, these companies, it doesn't matter if you can play ping pong if you don't have a planet to live on in 30 years. You know what I mean? I don't care if you're like catering my lunch. Yes, to your point, it is table stakes, and I'm not saying those things aren't noticed and they don't help, gain or get an employee, in the walls of your organization, but it isn't the differentiator anymore. And I don't even think having a social responsibility strategy should be used as a differentiation. It should be used as a responsibility. I mean, these companies have a responsibility because there's a fundamental erosion of trust in the institutions that we could depend on in the past. Government, church, whatever, people do not feel the same level of trust that they have in the past. And so they are looking to their employer to say, listen, help me and build a future for me. You know what I mean? Or I'm not going to spend, 2/3 of my time at this job. And I think that's a very fair thing to expect.
Yeah, I think there's a cultural shift that has happened all across where people are looking at, where do I spend my dollars? Where do I spend my time? Or is it going to be where my dollars, my time, my resources, my attention is going to go to some place that's going to be doing good? So whether it's things like Warby Parker and Tom's and companies that are, and even Hanky Panky, the panties company, there are a lot of incredible stories that are going along there, and people have a lot more choices, which is some of the benefits of having a strong economy. And like I said, I work for Salesforce and a company that puts social responsibility in its forefront. But I find that, and again, I'm in the South, so I'm in sales. So I work with a lot of organizations that, their companies tend to be stuck in a less socially responsible mindset. So how do you find companies that you work with? Are you looking at companies that are, kind of moving in that space, or how do you inspire companies that may not have thought that way? Tell me about your strategy for infiltration.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So we primarily focus on, there's two kind of answers to that question. One, we primarily focus on companies within the advertising and tech space. And the reason why we do that is I believe the advertising and technology space can change the world for the better more than any other industry in business. And the reason why I believe that is because from a technology standpoint, we are changing the way people behave on a daily basis. Uber has changed the way we get from point A to point B. Amazon has changed the way we shop. Like, we are fundamentally changing consumer behavior. And for you to think that that will not apply to the way that we volunteer or the way that we interact with nonprofits, is just not realistic, And so how do we make those companies realize that nonprofits out there cannot spend money on technology and they cannot spend money on marketing, right? Because they have to put as many dollars to the mission as they can. And so it's what we do every day, right? Like, we are constantly focused on those two things. And so they need us as an industry to bring them along. And so I think getting into these organizations, talking to them about that, and making sure that they understand that, listen, it's great that you went and planted a tree, or it's great that you donated to, this homeless shelter. And I'm not saying that you should not do that, to be clear, but I do think that you need to authentically lean into what you do on a daily basis as a company to see how you can amplify social good. So that's the first thing. The second thing that, when we're prospecting for companies is, when I got into the location space in 2012, it really, what I'm going through right now reminds me of that time, because we were really building and evangelizing the importance of location. The idea that, where you went in the physical world said something about you was still pretty new for most people, right? And so we were out there kind of, the company I was working for at the time, which is Ground Truth, it was formerly known as XAD, we were really changing the mindsets and getting people to think a different way. And this past year of launching Lucky Forks and talking to people about social responsibility, it has reminded me so much of that experience because, and I'm thankful for that experience because it's made me realize that you have to meet people where they are. You cannot, expect to walk into an organization that has no sort of strategy around social responsibility and say, you know what, you've got to have these policies and programs, you've got to have 7 volunteer days, you've got to do all these different things. It will overwhelm people. And so you've got to speak to them in a way that, one, I think doesn't feel overwhelming, but then 2, meets them where they are so that they see it and they feel it, and then they start to understand it. And time again, when we work with companies now, the first time they have an experience, one of the common comments we get is people will say, I get it now. Like, I totally see how we can impact society. And so it's understanding that process and respecting that process. And knowing that, to your point, I'm probably 99% of the time walking into a company that probably doesn't understand its value, meaning the value of social good, at the level that they can fully impact it. And so I've got to evangelize and educate that and bring them along the journey.
And I love what you said about it can be very overwhelming, because I thought about that too. There's so many causes to support. How do you help a corporation narrow down how to help and what will make the most impact? Because I imagine it's probably, you can go so many different ways. Like, how do you how do you narrow it down for them? How do you help them find what works?
No, that's a really great question. I think it starts with their values, one, and then 2, it starts with who they are, like what they have to offer. And then 3, it starts with, what it doesn't start, but, it is what their employees care about, and I think that if you get those 3 things, at a basic level, you're going to get, to a strategy that can resonate. But, I think people try to boil the ocean a lot where they're like, oh, you know what, it's so overwhelming. And in the company's defense, profits, for lack of, ill intention, they are not the easiest to work with because they're just trying to keep their head above water. They are running with really lean staff. They don't have time to, answer an email like in 30 minutes. And so, I think a lot of companies kind of get frustrated, with that process, and that's understandable. But, when you start with the values, you really identify from the values perspective what nonprofit aligns with your values. And then you dig into really what do they need. They may say, hey, I need money, but you realize that they really have no sort of infrastructure or system to know when to re-engage their donors. Then maybe you have the data and the technology to help them do that. You know what I mean? And so then there's a much more authentic connection between what your company does and then what that nonprofit needs from a corporate partnership perspective. But the thing that we say is, listen, social responsibility is not a volunteer day. You do not go and, you know what I love? I'm just going to make it up, Habitat for Humanity. And I'm going to go and volunteer at Habitat for Humanity, and now I am a socially responsible company. That's not how it works. That is, I am a company that has these values. I've found this nonprofit that I'm going to have a long-term partnership with, and we are going to help each other and help get to a common mission, I think is the right way to do it. And then to understand that you've got to create smaller paths for your employees to plug in if they're not passionate about the one or two things that your corporation chooses, whether that be volunteer time off or some sort of matching program, so that they have their own personal outlets to then engage and connect.
So do you feel like companies typically do have their values established, or is part of your service kind of fleshing out what those might be?
Yeah. So that's a good question. I'm sometimes surprised, when we have conversations, not necessarily that the companies don't know their values, but that
are they clearly defined?
Or there's too many of them, or they just can't recite them. I've worked in companies where the values were like drilled in our heads. You know what I mean? And so people would say, "What's your values?" And it was like you rambled off the words, right? And so I'm always a little surprised when I am, meeting with a company and I say, what are your values? And the people go, "Oh, what was it again? What's the 5 words?" Or you get into a company where maybe there's like 12 or 15 values and it's like so overwhelming that no one could really remember all of them. You know what I mean? And so it is helping them kind of narrow that down and really engage the employees to say, what do the employees really care about and how do they describe the organization? And then how does that overall value definition get constructed?
So, and that makes sense to me. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but this is kind of a burning question for me. Do you think that it is important for a corporation to take a political stance? Because when it comes to value or social, a lot of it is so intertwined, but so incredibly loaded, when it emotionally loaded. So, what are your thoughts on that? Is that important? Is that part of the strategic direction that you guys can offer?
Yeah, I think that no longer is it as, much of a faux pas to take a political stance where, if you would have asked me this 3 years ago, as recently that I probably would have been like, stay away from certain issues. I think that if you authentically can connect the values of your company with a controversial topic that you want to get behind, that is when I feel like people are much more accommodating than, just taking a stance to take a stance. And I think that you have to be, if you're going to take a stance like that, you do have to be able to explain why. And we have a partner, if you were listening to the podcast, Teeds, that partnered with Planned Parenthood or put out, with some other companies, a full page ad in the New York Times. And I asked that same question. I said, what was there any sort of negative impact to that? And there wasn't, because their organization really cares about the diversity and inclusion of all the people within their organization. So it very much aligned with what their employees care about, and they did not see any sort of negative impact from it.
That's what I figured. That's what I figured.
But it's a different thing. It's a different way for people to wrap their heads around, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's fairly
This is so new too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very understandable, for companies to kind of go, oh, where is the line and when am I going to step over it?
It's kind of like it's not something that you dip your toe in. You kind of have to jump in, if you're
Right.
going to take a stance that like that. So whether it's political, whether it is a controversial social issue,
Yeah.
I
You got
think
to
there's
own
so
it.
much importance to that too. Yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
curious about hiring practices. So from a cultural perspective, you've got organizations that are defining their values. They are defining social responsibility. What is your take? Do you feel like companies that you hire to fit a culture, or do you hire to expand what the culture could be?
Ooh, I love this question. You know what? I one time was interviewing a candidate at a former company, and she said to me, she goes, I want to see not how you're a cultural fit, but how you're a cultural add. And
Mm.
I love that, right? Like if you are constantly trying to fit within an organization, your organization doesn't evolve, and to your point, I think that, look, there have to be fundamental values that you align with. And one of the things that came out of the panel that one of the panelists said that I thought was super interesting, because I said, at what point, where do you draw the line that if your employer does something that you say, this is fundamentally against my values and I need to look for another job? Because you hear so many things around Gen Z specifically, really wanting to work for companies like that. And the answer was, when it starts to impact who I am as an individual, and so I think as an organization, as long as you can, continue to, allow people to be individuals, you fundamentally stay within the bounds of who your organization is, but you continue to have that flexibility to evolve with different people. I think that's the strategy to take.
I love that. And it's funny because I heard that question being posed, or at least that concept being posed on Masters of Scale. And I wonder, when so much talk is around culture, how do you find the right people? And I think it's interesting. So Lucky Forks, where did the name come from? And my second part is do good, be ready is your tagline. Be ready for what? So tell me about your name.
I just made it up. No.
My mind is just going like, be ready for what?
Yeah, no. So I am not, look, while I'm serious about the value we bring to the industry, I am, for people who know me also know I'm a pretty, I like to play practical jokes. I'm a pretty, I'm not a super serious person all the time.
I heard you do a great version of the Arkansas fight song. I might ask you to do it later.
Julie Stewart.
Julie Stewart.
Anyway, but maybe that is true. But anyway, so, from, now you made me forget what the question was. Cause
it was Lucky Forks, like the meaning of Lucky Forks, and then do good, be ready.
Yeah. I was like, oh God, I started picturing myself in my head. But anyway, so Lucky Forks, I wanted something playful. I didn't want something super serious. Luck is something that brings good fortune, but out of a lack of preparation. And I feel like a lot of the companies are not prepared for this fundamental shift. So that was the luck piece. And then a fork is about a fork in the road. I think it was about a fork in the road for me personally to choose what I wanted to do rather than it just be about money. And then, also a fork in the road for these companies. And then a fork is a tool too, you know what I mean? That feeds some sort of need. And so there were several different things that kind of kept bringing me to those two words. And I kind of like the lightheartedness and ambiguousness of it, because when we meet with people, a lot of people will ask that question. So, which is understandable. And then from do good, be ready. I mean, obviously do good is pretty self-explanatory, but be ready is, speaking to our clients. Like, this is not a trend. It's not a fad. This is something that is, what I tell people is, think about it like when you used to go into offices and they were all closed door offices and really high cubicle walls, and it was just, if you walked into an office in that way today, it would feel stiff or like an outdated culture, right? That was probably the impression you would have, especially in advertising and tech. And what I say to people is, this next workforce shift is not as tangible as that. It's more of a feeling than it is something that visual. And people are feeling it. Everyone's feeling it because I talk to people and they'll say something just isn't connecting anymore, or, I'm not curing cancer with what I'm doing with my job. And it's more of them just feeling this intangible workforce change, evolution that's happening. And so that's the best way that I've, been able to think about it in my mind of change. But the change is emotional. The change is, more spiritual or something that's not tangible, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I feel like that's happening all over the place, where even how my podcast, Little Left of Center, has started is how can I do more? And how can I be of service? How can I serve is kind of what I constantly ask myself. How can I serve? And so, and that kind of plays along with your concept of do good, be ready. Tell me about Give Me 5.
Yeah, so Give Me 5. So here's what I'll say, kind of just piggybacking on what you just said, and then I'll get into Give Me 5. Is I completely agree, and I think that where people overcomplicate it is they think that that being of service has to be like I'm out there planting trees or building a house or whatever, and I just fundamentally don't believe that. I think if you talk to any of my friends, I've never been a big person out there volunteering or that sort of thing. You know what I mean? And so I don't claim to be, but I do think that as business people, we have a responsibility to take those skill sets and see how we can amplify social good from that perspective. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think that you've got to find where you're comfortable with giving back, whether that's just by making donations because you're a busy person, and that's okay. And that was kind of where I always went, in my direction, was more just like in a monetary sense. But, kind of landing on one, giving yourself that flexibility to really land on what your skill set is. But then two, really think about what makes you happy. So I just wanted to say that from a Give Me 5 perspective, kind of going into what do you know, with, my previous comment, what I knew was how to run sales teams, right? Going into this, I'd been a part, of the company who did the social responsibility program, but I was like, I know how much money is spent by entertaining clients. There's in our industry, there's a lot of fancy dinners. There's a lot of baseball games or concerts. Mm-hmm. There's buying jeans and all kinds of stuff, right? And what I started thinking about, was how much money was wasted or not used in a fully beneficial way. And if there was a way to get a company to think about taking 5% of that budget, not necessarily finding new budget, but taking 5% of the budget they already have and utilizing that budget more for social impact and for ways that could actually be entertainment that gave back to community. So maybe instead of the really fancy dinner where you have 3 or 4 glasses of wine and forget what you talk about after that, or
yes.
I do. That's what happens to me. Why not take that client out and do something in the community and use that money to actually give back? And so that's how Give Me 5 got started. And what I'll say is that the response from the advertising and tech community has been so strong that, we launched that initiative April 1st.
Because it's really a challenge to other organizations, isn't it?
It is. I say it's an awareness initiative because it's really about the message. Yes, it is this target of 5%. And it is a challenge because it's a challenge to think differently, but, it's also to raise awareness. I had, an agency CEO, say to me, look, we have had to put policies and programs in place because of the ways that we are perceived to be entertained. And he said, you are basically saying with Give Me 5, we can entertain, but do it in ways that actually give back to community so that it's more benefiting the public than it is about benefiting us through some sort of more materialistic experience. And so, so that was how it took shape. And, I'm happy to say that, in 7 months, we've had, 14 companies sign up and we have more coming on board. We already have people that are committed into 2020. And so, and it's companies like Spotify and Hulu and, Outfront Media that, they have their own social responsibility arms, but they're saying we believe in what this message is saying to our industry.
This sounds like a utopian state. It sounds amazing to be able to do that. And even when you were talking before about the agencies or the companies that have the high cubicles and the closed doors, it really is like hierarchy versus collaborative level playing field, which I think is where companies are moving towards, instead of just, like the hierarchical, the little people don't matter, the big people do. Trivial many, vital few, where it seems like it's much more level playing field where everybody contributes in a way that's impactful, that's meaningful. So I can't see a loss in that, why people would say no, which brings me to my next question is how do you measure success? What does success look like to you?
Success I feel success out of the response I see from people who have a volunteer day with us, or, our Q3 Give Me 5 event. We, funded a full year's worth of projects for a school in the Lower East Side, Anna Silver school that is in the Lower East Side. And the principal and teachers came to our event and talked about, for the first time, they had iPads and computers and all of these things that they hadn't been able to, afford previously. And we were able to partner with DonorsChoose.org, which is an amazing nonprofit, if people are not aware of it, and fund those projects. And I think it's those moments that, you start to see your impact. And I think those companies felt their impact. But I will say, being more high level from a Lucky Forks perspective is where the mission of the company is going. It is to create social impact out of the budgets you already have and the time you already spend as an organization.
So it's just repurposing. It's just repurposing.
It is. It's saying, guys, I'm not asking you to do different things. The only thing I'm asking you to do differently is to think differently. You know what I mean? I'm not asking you to go find different money. I'm not asking you to change a behavior. I'm asking you to think differently about how you act currently, and do it in a really easy way. You know what I mean? That actually, when you take one company that then becomes 5 companies, that then becomes 14 companies, that really starts to add up and can do some great social impact. And so that's kind of where I measure success, is watching that growth.
Oh, that's so cool. And I'm wondering, if you focus on advertising and technology companies, are there plans to go outside of that?
You know what? Yes. So we definitely have some plans to expand that with some different projects that I won't speak about right now because
they're in the works. It's embargoed.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a focus from everyone, within the team of how do we scale our social impact, and how do we find those things that can scale very easily and make a really massive impact. And I know that's very ambiguous, but at my core, I am a technology person. I have worked, in companies where I like data and I like to think about how you impact as many people as possible. So that's always been a goal. So the events, the experiences, all that will remain very fundamental. But I think in 2020, what people will see is that we take it to the next level to say, okay, how do we really maximize impact in a more technological way?
Oh, that's so cool. And I'm wondering,
you're saying it's cool and you don't even know what it is.
I don't even know. Well, it sounds like you're expanding. So that's important too.
Right,
and
right.
It takes a lot of work. It's hard work to launch and run a business like you're doing. What do you do for fun? I know that. So, I don't know if I don't think I mentioned this before, but my good friend, Julie Stewart, had texted me and is like, you've got to talk to Chad Hickey. He is just so up your alley. You've got to talk to him. He's amazing. And so that's how I came to find you. But Julie told me that you're really great at karaoke. What do you do outside of work that refuels
I feel
you?
like Julie did this just to terrorize me, and she's probably, when she listens to this, I can hear her cackling right now.
Yes.
But so I do love karaoke. Ain't No Way by
What's your
Aretha
song?
Franklin is
Oh,
my go-to song. Yeah.
mine is These Boots Are Made for Walking.
Well, you know what? Maybe we'll sing together sometime.
I am so in.
You know what? I really love to travel. And then outside of that, I mean, I could be much better about having a personal life. I think that, look, when you find something that you feel really inspired by, and it doesn't feel like work, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I probably spend a little too much time doing that, but I like it, and so I don't really see that as a negative.
Where do you like to travel? Where's your favorite place?
Lake Como, Italy, by far. So definitely not on the Lake
Hanging
Como,
out with
Italy
Clooney
budget anymore when I'm building a company. But
yes.
I've been there twice now, and that was actually a fundamental spot that made me land on the idea of doing my own company. As I was at a hotel there, and I was relaxing, and I was traveling alone for the first time ever. And I was reading the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. If people haven't read it, you definitely should.
I think it's hilarious.
Yeah. When you listen to the guy, you're like, whoa, okay. But, there's a part of the book that says, what are you willing to feel pain for? And I sat straight up when I never thought of it that way. You know what I mean? Because look, for most of my 30s had really good jobs that allowed me to be really comfortable financially. And I really just wasted a lot of money. You know what I mean? And I didn't do anything I didn't do anything meaningful with it, and so it really came down to, for me, my pain point was, are you willing to go back to living on a budget and, cooking at home and all those things that I wasn't necessarily doing a lot of, if you feel strongly enough that this company, solves a need in the market. And so that's what I just kept going back to that one question as I really land on, taking the leap and forming the company.
And I love that too. And I can relate to that. Like, I think when you love what you do and you're passionate, when you feel like you're serving a purpose, you love it, like you can't wait to do more of it, because you can see the ripple effect of your impact. And I don't know that there's anything more intoxicating than knowing what you're doing is making an impact.
Well, and taking on, taking a different form than what you thought. Initially it was just to be, consulting and going in and forming social responsibility programs for companies. It's really taken on a much different meaning. For me, one, the first thing was really learning nonprofits and what they needed. But then two, and it's been something fairly recently that, someone pointed out to me. I was having a conversation with someone who had listened to the first 3 episodes of the podcast, and they said, it's really interesting to me how many people in advertising don't think they provide value. He goes, I've heard multiple times on your podcast, people say, well, I'm pushing ads, or we're not curing cancer here. And I was like, I've heard that a million times by friends in the industry. And what I think is interesting about that perspective that really made the hairs on my arm stand up is, when did we get to a point that we stopped understanding the power to influence culture in a positive way? I mean, people who are in advertising shape behaviors. That's what we do. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so who are we to think that we provide no value if we take that skill set and use it for social purpose, that it can be so powerful? So yes, you may not be the doctor that's in the operating room curing the cancer, but you can at least raise awareness through messaging around nonprofits or causes that you can donate to that then will lead to curing the cancer. You know what I mean? We play a significant part in that. And so, the piece that is taken shape is making people understand how we can really impact community if we do it in the right way. The problem is that most companies aren't thinking about, hey, it's what I do all the time. It doesn't have to be something else. Does that make sense?
Yes, I love that too. I hope a lot of people listen to this podcast because I think it's sparking so much for me. And I could imagine it makes perfect sense, for people that run businesses. What if they could do more, but with the resources they already have, just reallocating them,
Yep.
and even being able to impact like that ripple effect. And I'm curious, what do you know that you wish people could learn?
Besides how to sing Ain't No Way.
I want to hear it.
I think that it is like, take what you know and don't overthink it, and find a way to provide the impact that plays on your skill set. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that you don't have to do it the same way as everyone else. Like, you don't have to be this person that has always been volunteer of the year or those sort of things, that really hone in on those skill sets that can create the most impact in the way that feels the most comfortable to you. And, I think that just as valuable to me personally as like what the company is also doing. And so I think it's letting yourself go through that process and like, stop fighting the current, as Oprah would say, and go with the flow. I tell people all the time, I feel more in the flow of my life, as cheesy as that sounds, and my eyes want to roll back in my head just by saying it. I feel more in the flow of my life, like, than I probably ever have, because I'm kind of just going with the flow, which anyone who knows me knows I'm not great at doing. I try to be a control freak, but
Wow.
yeah. So, but you know what I mean. It's like, and maybe that's what I would say is, do what you feel is the right thing, and then everything else will hopefully work out,
It sounds like it's something that is deep inside you, is kind of emanating, like you're kind of living your truth, to get all Oprah on you. But yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Like, I mean, again, like, I'm so not like, again, when I have these conversations, I typically don't do it publicly. But, I'm sure it can sound cheesy to some people, but whatever that truth is or whatever that flow is, like, find it, and then don't put too much scrutiny on yourself to be a certain way. Do it in the best way
Yeah.
that you know.
I love that. I love that. So how can people contribute to your mission? What is the best way? So if I have listeners, maybe they're in New York, maybe they're in Atlanta, maybe they're somewhere else. How can people contribute?
Yeah, I think that, if you're in the industries, that we've talked about, and you have a sales team and you understand the entertainment budgets that are used, and the Give Me Five initiative speaks to you, then would love to have companies be a part. If you're a company that has done a couple of things, but you haven't really formalized a full plan, then we can help you. I think that if you have annual sales conferences or company conferences, we're going up to Canada in a couple months to actually do an annual conference with an entire company, and we're bringing in 300 kids, with a different nonprofit. Like, we can help you from that perspective. And then if you're just interested in learning more about the company in general, then, I'm happy to take calls, and to talk to people about a little bit more transparency on the longer term vision of the company. So,
Chad, you're doing such awesome things. I love this. How can people find you? What's the best way to reach you?
Well, my email, okay, we're giving that out. It's chad@luckyfork.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And so, we're pretty much on all the social channels, but you can email me directly. But those are the best ways.
So I'm wondering too, like, how do you guys find the nonprofits, or do they reach out to you too?
You know what? So we've spent a lot of time really vetting over 300 nonprofits ourselves. And we use different tools that are out there where nonprofits are rated to see how much money actually goes to the mission and that sort of thing. But most of it is like us doing our own research or word of mouth. We also have an office in the Center for Social Innovation. And so that is almost like a social impact WeWork, for a lack of a better comparison. And it is all companies and nonprofits and any sort of organization that has a social impact tie to it. And so we've been able to experience some really, or meet some really great nonprofits also through just our office space too. So in fact, our Q4 event is a carnival for homeless children, where we're partnering with a nonprofit called Knock Knock Give a Sock, which we met through our office, and they're an amazing organization that does sock drives for homeless people. And so we're going to be doing a holiday carnival with the companies that have taken the pledge, and bringing in 250 kids so that they get to experience something at the holidays. So
I love that. And I love that employees get to be face to face with people that are facing challenge. I think based on my own experience, it's one thing to learn about it, but when you're kind of in the midst of it, it changes you in a way, in a good way, in a more compassionate, empathetic way. So I love what you're doing. Chad, thank you so much for your work and your impact, for taking time with me. You are a culture changer. So thank you, Chad. I love talking to Chad Hickey of Lucky Forks. I'm a little disappointed I wasn't able to get him to sing the Arkansas fight song during our chat, but I love the impact Lucky Forks is ushering by helping companies define and execute their social strategy. I've linked his info in the show notes. As for Little Left of Center, in addition to streaming on your favorite podcast app, these podcasts are also broadcasting on Decatur FM and Salesforce Radio. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, please make sure you do so you never miss an episode of these perspective-shifting episodes. Leave a review, share it with your friends and enemies. I'm also looking for sponsors for future episodes, so feel free to follow me on the socials and hit me up. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.